King Jesus, King Jesus. Okay. Hey, I'm going to do this video on the controversy surrounding Ebola virus and biowarfare that's conducted throughout the world. Now, I think I'm qualified to discuss this issue because I have a bachelor's degree in molecular biology and biochemistry before I got my MD degree as a physician. And not only that, I was trained at Brown University by James Watson using this book called The Double Helix that he authored. James Watson, as you may know, very famously discovered DNA with Francis Crick. And during my time at Brown University, I started there in 1972. James Watson was a visiting professor to my university, and I took his classes. And he taught me about DNA, the potentials of DNA, the potentials of manipulating DNA, and how to make diseases. So theoretically, I know how to make diseases, but I've never worked in the field because I was always focused on curing diseases. So I had a deep understanding of diseases from a molecular point of view, and I still do. So this book, The Double Helix, is available as a PDF. If you want to investigate for yourself, you can read it. It was written in 1968. So as to my own personal background, that's the situation. But what I want to report is the controversy in this Liberian newspaper that accuses the West of creating Ebola. And I also want to come down on the side of the gentleman who wrote this article. His name is Dr. Cyril Broderick, and he's a native-born Liberian and a professor in plant pathology. Now, you might understand that DNA is a ubiquitous substance found in all living systems. So he is qualified as a professor in plant pathology to know about DNA and what you can do with DNA. It's not like because he works in plant pathology, he would not know about DNA as it applies to humans, other animals, other species, other living systems. Because DNA is the information for living systems on Earth and possibly throughout the universe. We don't know. So without no further ado, I'm going to get into the article. And he gives 5 wide-ranging points for his conclusion that, in fact, Ebola was manufactured. And I'll go through them. Horowitz, point 1, Ebola is a genetically modified organism. That's point 1. And it says that Horowitz in 1998 was deliberate and unambiguous when he explained the threat of new diseases in his text, Emerging Viruses, AIDS and Ebola, Nature, Accident, or Intentional. In his interview with Dr. Robert Straker in Chapter 7, the discussion in the early 70s made it obvious that the war was between countries that hosted the KGB and the CIA, and the manufacture of AIDS-like viruses was clearly directed at the other. In passing during the interview, mention was made of Fort Detrick, the Ebola building, and a lot of problems with strange illnesses in Frederick, Maryland. By Chapter 12 in his text, he had confirmed the existence of an American military medical industry that conducts biological weapons tests under the guise of administering vaccinations to control diseases and improve the health of Black Africans overseas. The book is an excellent text, and all leaders, plus anyone who has interest in science, health, people, and intrigue, should study it. I am amazed that African leaders are making no acknowledgments or reference to these documents. Now, I agree with this first conclusion 100%. I was also an ophthalmology resident at the Naval Hospital Bethesda that was across the street from the National Institute of Health when the active phase of the AIDS breakout occurred. And I happen to know that I visited the National Institute of Health and made inquiry to certain researchers there as to the origin of this disease. And what they were saying, for my consumption anyway, was that it was came from monkeys in Africa. And you know, at the time I thought it was bullshit, and I still think it's bullshit today. It says his point too is that Ebola has a terrible history, and testing has been secretly taking place in Africa. I am now reading The Hot Zone, a novel by Richard Preston, copyright 1969 and 1994. It is heart-rending. The prolific and prominent writer, Stephen King, is quoted as saying that the book is one of the most horrifying things I have ever read. What a remarkable piece of work. As a New York Times bestseller, The Hot Zone is presented as a terrifying true story. Terrifying, yes, because the pathological description of what was found in animals killed by the Ebola virus is what the virus is doing to citizens in Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia in its most recent outbreak. Ebola virus destroys people's internal organs, and the body deteriorates rapidly after death. It softens, and the tissues turn into jelly, even if it is refrigerated to keep it cold. Spontaneous liquefaction is what happens to the body of people killed by the Ebola virus. The author noted in point 1, Dr. Horowitz chides the Hot Zone for writing to be politically correct. I understand, because this book makes every effort to be very factual. The 1976 Ebola incident in Zaire during President Mobutu Sese Seko was the introduction of the GMO Ebola to Africa, that is genetically modified Ebola. So again, I could agree with that point. From my background, I happen to know. I should add parenthetically, when I went to medical school, I placed out of molecular biology and biochemistry and didn't really have to take it. Point 3. Sites around Africa and in West Africa have, over the years, been set up for testing emerging diseases, especially Ebola. It says here, the World Health Organization and several other UN agencies have been implicated in selecting and enticing African countries to participate in the testing events, promoting vaccinations but pursuing various testing regimens. In the August 2nd, 2014 article, West Africa, What is the U.S. Biological Warfare Research Doing in the Ebola Zone by John Rappaport of Global Research, pinpoints the problem that is facing African governments. Obvious in this and other reports are, among others, A, the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, the USAMRIID, a well-known center for biowar research located in Fort Detrick, Maryland. B, Tulane University in New Orleans, USA, winner of research grants, including a grant of more than $7 million, the National Institute of Health, to fund research with the Lassa viral hemorrhagic fever. C, the U.S. Center for Disease Control. D, Doctors Without Borders, also known by its French name, Médecins Sans Frontières, E. Tecmara, a Canadian pharmaceutical company, F. the UK GlaxoSmithKline, and G. the Kenema Government Hospital in Kenema, Sierra Leone. Reports narrate stories of the U.S. Department of Defense funding Ebola trials on humans, trials which started just weeks before the Ebola outbreak in Guinea and Sierra Leone. The reports continue to state that the DoD gave a contract worth $140 million to Tecmara, a Canadian pharmaceutical company, to conduct Ebola research. This research work involved injecting and infusing healthy humans with the deadly Ebola virus, hence the DoD is listed as a collaborator in a first-in-human Ebola clinical trial. It's identified as document NCT 02041715, which started in January 2014, shortly before an Ebola epidemic was declared in West Africa in March. Disturbingly, many of the reports also conclude that the U.S. government has a viral fever bioterrorism research laboratory in Kenema, a town at the epicenter of the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. The only relevant, positive, and ethical olive branch seen in all of my reading is that TheGuardian.com reports the U.S. government funding of Ebola trials on healthy humans comes amid warnings by top scientists in Harvard and Yale that such virus experiments risk triggering a worldwide pandemic. That threat still persists. 4. The need for legal action to obtain redress for damages incurred due to the perpetuation of injustice in the death, injury, and trauma imposed on Liberians and other Africans by the Ebola and other disease agents. The US, Canada, France, and the UK are all implicated in the detestable and devilish deeds that these Ebola tests are. There is the need to pursue criminal and civil redress for damages in African countries, and people should secure legal representation to seek damages from these countries, some corporations, and the United Nations. Evidence seems abundant against Tulane University, and suits should start there. Aochi Shimitsu articles, the Ebola outbreak coincides with UN vaccination campaigns, is published on August 18, 2014 in the Liberty Beacon. 5. African leaders in African countries need to take the lead in defining babies, children, African women, African men, and elderly. These citizens do not deserve to be used as guinea pigs. Africa must not relegate the continent to become the locality for disposal and disposition of hazardous chemicals, dangerous drugs, and chemical or biological agents of emerging diseases. There is urgent need for affirmative action in protecting the less influential or poorer countries, especially African citizens whose countries are not as scientifically and industrially endowed as the United States and most Western countries. Sources of most viral or bacterial GMOs, genetically modified organisms that are strategically designed as biological weapons. It is most disturbing that the U.S. government has been operating a viral hemorrhagic fever bioterrorism research laboratory in Sierra Leone. Are there others? Wherever they exist, it is time to terminate them. If any other sites exist, it is advisable to follow the delayed but essential step. Sierra Leone closed the U.S. bioweapons lab and stopped Tulane University from further testing. The world must be alarmed. All Africans, Americans, Europeans, Middle Easterners, Asians, and other people from every conclave on earth should be astonished. African people, notably citizens more particularly of Liberia, Guinea, and Sierra Leone, are victimized and are dying every day. Listen to the people who distrust the hospitals, who cannot shake hands, hug their relatives or friends. Innocent people are dying, and they need our help. The countries are poor and cannot afford the whole lot of personal protection equipment that the situation requires. The threat is real, and it is larger than a few African countries. The challenge is global, and we request assistance from everywhere, including China, Japan, Australia, India, Germany, Italy, and every kind-hearted people in the US, France, the UK, Russia, Korea, Saudi Arabia, and everywhere else whose desire is to help. The situation is bleaker than we on the outside can imagine, and we must provide assistance however we can to ensure the future that has less of this kind of drama. It is important that we now demand that our leaders in government be honest, transparent, fair, and productively engaged. We must answer to the people. We stand up to stop Ebola testing and the spread of this dastardly disease. So this is what the gentleman wrote. And his name is Dr. Cyril Broderick, and he's a native-born Nigerian professor in plant biology. Now, he was motivated to write this because when he first started looking into it, he said, I have read a number of articles from your internet outreach as well as articles from other sources about the casualties in Liberia and other West African countries, about the human devastation caused by the Ebola virus. About a week ago, I read an article published in the Internet News Summary publications of the Friends of Liberia that said that there was an agreement that the initiation, listen to this now, that the initiation of the Ebola outbreak in West Africa was due to the contact of a 2-year-old child with bats that had flown in from the Congo. Now, this is so much bullshit, people. He said that the report made him sick, and that's why he wrote this letter. Now, for the part of Western sources, the Washington Post, I guess to inform the power structure in the United States and what type of position to take on this article, their headline reads, reporting this article that a professor in the U.S. is telling Liberians that the Defense Department manufactured Ebola. What the article is saying, written by Terrence McCoy, by the way, who is a reporter, this is what he is saying. He said last week, President Obama announced an ambitious and expensive. Now, I want to just say something on behalf of President Obama's behalf. President Obama is a politician. He's a political scientist. He's not a biological scientist. In other words, if you're not studied in this area, you have no way of understanding really what genetic manipulation is really about. When they use DNA in courts, the people who are making judgments about DNA identification have absolutely no understanding how they reach a conclusion that it's a match or not. And likewise, President Obama does not know what is going on in the scientific side of the government. In fact, there should be no scientific side of the government that uses biological agents. In any case, this research was started long before he became president. Even before I graduated from medical school, because I graduated in 1980. And in 1980, the AIDS epidemic was just being full blown. So research into these diseases, AIDS and Ebola, is so much older than Obama, and the mechanisms for implementing warfare with these diseases is so buried in the government that Obama would be hard pressed to dig it out. And I imagine when he realized what is happening, on advice, that he has taken action. I mean, he can't just come out and say that the United States is responsible as president. He is still the leader of this country. He has to take action, and he has. It said last week, President Obama announced an ambitious and expensive plan that effectively placed the U.S. military at the forefront of the global fight against the worst Ebola outbreak in history, the worst caused Ebola outbreak in history, in an effort that could cost as much as $750 million. In the next 6 months, he assigned up to 3,000 military personnel to West Africa to combat and contain what officials call an extraordinarily serious epidemic. As those military doctors and officials began what will be a difficult task, among the challenges they face are, and he calls them rumors that spread fear. Fear of Ebola, fear of quarantine measures, and fear of doctors. Already several medical workers have been murdered in Guinea. Throats slit, bodies dumped in a latrine. Then 6 Red Cross volunteers were attacked earlier this week while they tried to collect the body of an Ebola victim. And now, in what may plant further seeds of mistrust and suspicion, a major Liberian newspaper, the Daily Observer, has published an article by a Liberian-born faculty member of a U.S. university implying the epidemic is the result of bioterrorism experiments conducted by the United States Department of Defense, among others. I agree with him. As a scientist myself and as a physician, I 100% agree that not only did they cause Ebola, but they started the AIDS epidemic that killed millions and millions of black people. And millions of black people. And some of my friends included. And while some commenting on the article are critical, the number who praised it was telling. They are using Ebola, one wrote, for calling the world population, mainly Africa, for the purpose of gaining control of the African resources criminally. A piece purports to describe scientific findings from various reports which are not cited in detail and even references the best-selling thriller The Hot Zone. Reports narrate stories of the U.S. Department of Defense funding Ebola trials on humans, trials which started just weeks before the Ebola outbreak in Guinea and Sierra Leone. Under the headline, Ebola, AIDS manufactured by Western Pharmaceuticals, U.S. Department of Defense, it says, U.S., Canada, France, and the U.K. are all implicated in the detestable and devilish deeds that these Ebola tests are. There is a need to pursue criminal and civil redress. Now they're calling this uneducated full reporter is calling the article semi-intelligible. But he said, the article says the CDC, the World Health Organization, and Doctors Without Borders are responsible, and they are. In Dr. Broderick's defense of his article, when approached by the Washington Post, he said, there are many references to what was contained in my letter. You may read the letter and double-check the sources listed. They are available and legitimate. Now they're calling this a conspiracy theory, and that's what the officialdom always does in order to cover its tracks, and that's ridiculous. They should really launch a worldwide inquiry and investigate and report on this instead of politics as usual, because millions and millions of lives are at stake. My point is that as a Black American, I have no power base in America to try to fight these folks. They've killed they've killed many, many scientists already that have attempted to fight them who were not Black. And Blacks have no power base to fight this. Even in Africa, they do not have the educational backgrounds among the people to fight this thing. Nor do they have the technological underpinnings to their society to be able to resist. And many of the leaders of the African nations are basically ignorant of science altogether and believe more in magic. So you can see the situation that Africa is in at the hands of these racist people that would commit genocide on the African population, the Black African population, as they did the Redskins in America. So that's my conclusion. I agree with Professor Broderick, endorse 100% his point of view and what he's reporting, and I hope that something can be done.